You don't sabotage winning trades because you don't want to win. You sabotage them because winning creates a new problem you don't know how to sit with. Here's what usually happens: you enter clean, the setup is solid, risk is defined. Price moves in your favor, and instead of relief, something tightens. Not fear of loss, fear of holding, because holding changes the rules. Before the trade, your job is simple: wait, execute, manage risk. Once the trade is working, your job becomes psychological. Now you have something to lose, not just money, confirmation. Confirmation that you were right, that your read was clean, that your execution matched your self image. As the trade moves further into profit, that confirmation feels fragile, like it could be taken away at any moment. So your system starts negotiating. You should take some here. It's already good enough. No one ever went broke taking profit. Those thoughts sound conservative. They're not. They're protective. Because holding a winner means accepting volatility while being right. And that's harder than being wrong. When you're wrong, expectations are low. When you're right, expectations spike. And expectations create pressure. Pressure to not mess it up. Pressure to lock it in. Pressure to prove the trade deserved to exist. So you exit early. You tell yourself you're being disciplined. But notice the timing. You didn't exit because structure broke. You didn't exit because your plan said so. You exited because the emotional load increased. Winning felt heavier than losing. That's not a strategy problem. That's a relationship with success problem. Many traders are comfortable being wrong. They're not comfortable being right for long, because prolonged success exposes something uncomfortable. It exposes how much of your identity is tied to outcomes. As the trade works, your mind starts projecting. What if this reverses? What if I give it back? What if this was the best it gets? Those thoughts collapse time. They pull future pain into the present moment, so you escape it. You take profit not because it's optimal, but because it ends the tension. That's the part most traders never notice. Early profit taking isn't about greed or fear, it's about relief. Relief from anticipation, relief from responsibility, relief from sitting with uncertainty while things are going well. And the market is expensive when used for emotional relief. This is why you can string together great entries and still stagnate. You're not losing trades, you're losing expectancy. Every early exit teaches your system something. It teaches that winning is unsafe, that holding is risky, that safety lives in locking things down. Over time, that lesson compounds. You start aiming for smaller wins. You start managing too tightly. You start celebrating exits more than execution. And without realizing it, you cap your upside. Not because you lack skill, but because your nervous system doesn't trust success to last. Once you see that, the behavior stops being confusing. It becomes mechanical. Win appears, pressure rises, exit feels stabilizing. That loop repeats until it's interrupted. And interruption doesn't come from better targets. It comes from changing how you relate to being right. Winning trades don't feel dangerous until you stay in them long enough for imagination to take over. At first, it's clean. You're present, you're focused, you're doing exactly what you planned. Then profit grows, and with it, a new internal dialogue starts. You begin monitoring the P&L instead of the structure. You start watching ticks instead of context. Your attention shifts from execution to protection. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because protection isn't neutral. Protection narrows perception. You stop seeing the trade as a process unfolding. You start seeing it as something fragile that needs defending. That's when micromanagement begins. You tighten stops not because price tells you to, but because your body does. You consider partials not because they're planned, but because uncertainty is rising. You justify early exits as smart risk management. but notice the real driver. Nothing in the market changed. Only your relationship to the outcome did. The moment a trade works, it stops being hypothetical. It becomes evidence, evidence that you were right. And being right creates a new vulnerability. You can now be wrong again. That sounds obvious, but psychologically, it matters. Before the trade works, there's nothing to lose but money. Once it works, you can lose meaning. Meaning attached to timing, meaning attached to skill, meaning attached to self trust. So the system looks for safety, not long term expectancy safety, immediate emotional safety. The fastest way to feel safe is to end the exposure. Close the trade, lock the win, remove the uncertainty. That's why early exits often feel like relief. The tension drops instantly. Your body relaxes, your mind quiets. And that relief gets mislabeled as discipline. But discipline doesn't seek relief. Discipline follows criteria even when relief isn't available. Here's the deeper mechanism. If you don't trust yourself to remain grounded while you're right, you'll never hold winners. Not because you lack patience, but because success itself feels destabilizing. Many traders grew up learning how to handle mistakes. They didn't learn how to handle momentum. They learned how to cope with being wrong. They didn't learn how to stay present while things are going well. So the nervous system does what it knows how to do. It ends the situation early. This is why traders often say, I just didn't want to give it back. What they really mean is, I didn't know how to stay regulated while holding something valuable. That's not a moral failure. It's a skill gap, and skills can be trained, but not by forcing yourself to hold longer. Forcing creates resistance. The real work happens earlier, in learning to notice the exact moment profit turns into pressure. That moment predicts behavior far better than price does, because once pressure rises, logic takes a back seat. The exit becomes inevitable unless the pattern is interrupted. That interruption doesn't come from willpower, it comes from changing how your system interprets success. And that's where this actually turns. Holding winners longer isn't about confidence, it's about capacity. Your capacity to stay regulated while things are going your way. That's the part no one trains. Most people practice loss. They practice being wrong. They practice recovery. Very few practice success because success removes excuses. When a trade works, there's no market to blame, no bad fill to point at, no external reason to hide behind. It's just you and what you choose to do next. That's confronting. So your system looks for an exit, not because the trade is invalid, but because the internal load is increasing. The longer you stay in, the more responsibility you feel for what happens next. Responsibility for timing, responsibility for patience, responsibility for letting it breathe. And responsibility creates pressure, pressure to not mess it up, pressure to not be greedy, pressure to prove you deserve the win. So you shrink the outcome. You take what's reasonable, you take what's safe, you take what won't hurt if it reverses. That choice feels mature, but over time it teaches your system that safety lives in limitation, that being right is something to end quickly, that success is unstable. Those lessons don't stay on the chart. They leak into how you size, how you select trades, how you think about opportunity. Eventually, you stop aiming for asymmetric outcomes because they require you to stay exposed longer. You start preferring certainty over expectancy. That's when growth stalls. Not because your strategy broke, but because your tolerance for sustained success never developed. Here's the quiet truth: you don't need to become braver to hold winners. You need to become calmer while you're winning. Calm enough to let structure play out. Calm enough to accept pullbacks. Calm enough to let profit fluctuate without interpreting it as danger. That calm doesn't come from thinking. It comes from repetition, from staying in trades slightly longer than is comfortable, from noticing the urge to exit and not obeying it immediately, from letting success feel unfamiliar without escaping it. Those moments train something deeper than discipline. They train trust, trust that you can stay present without sabotaging yourself, trust that success doesn't require control, just alignment. Once that trust forms, holding winners stops feeling heroic. It feels normal. And when something feels normal, it compounds. Not because you're forcing outcomes, but because you're no longer afraid of letting good things continue. That's the real shift. Not bigger targets, not tighter rules. A system that no longer rushes to end success. A trader who doesn't flinch when things are going well. That's when expectancy finally shows up. Not as a theory, as a lived experience. And once you experience it, you stop asking how to hold winners longer. You simply stop cutting them short.